How's it going, duelists? Today I just did a video with Yacine. In it, we go over the matchup analysis of Tearlaments versus Spright. And that's all the variants pretty much post Darkwing Blast. And in it, we kind of reference the past YCS, just being dominated by Runic Spright. I encourage you to watch the whole video because, first we go over the die roll relevance, then we go over hand traps impact, then we go over the overall consistency between the two decks, then inherent blowouts, then, just what happens game 2 and 3 post side. So I encourage you to stay to the end because we pretty much go through it in that order, but we elaborate upon those thoughts. With that being said, this is one of the most anticipated matchups of this next upcoming YCS Minneapolis, and I hope you guys enjoy. How's it going, guys? Today I have a matchup analysis of Tearlaments versus Spright, and I have Yacine with me to help me out with making this analysis on these two decks and the matchup between the two because a lot of things have changed. We got Spright Rind and Lulu Karos, and Tear has way more access to the trap with the new continuous spell. So, you seen anything you want to say?
Yo, what's good, guys? Well, I mean, yeah, this matchup is definitely going to be really interesting. Honestly, we're pretty much discussing, the two most played and popular decks of the format right now. Tearlaments being probably the most anticipated because the ceiling level is ridiculously high, and because of the fact that people are so prepared for the deck and respect it so much, they're also pretty much building their deck to beat it, but at the same time, they have to respect Spright because everybody can play Spright. I want to say it's the easier deck to play, but there's so many different builds of it that it's still going to be very tricky to analyze because some of the builds just don't even look similar, like Tri-Brigade Splite and Runic Splite, they operate in completely different manners. And Tearlaments is also kind of somewhat similar because there's like a handshap version that's just like a little bit more mid-range, and then there's super combo builds like the Lunalite version.
And comparing the two, it's like Snow got hit for Tear, Spright, Ronin Totem got hit. Do you think people are still going to play the Swap Frog with Toad?
So in Splite, I think they might because Splite Sprint can send the Angler so that you can summon Double Beaver, and then you can use the Sprint as well as the Angler to make Gigantic, summon the Swap Frog, send the Swap Frog, use the other Beaver with the Gigantic to make the Elf, revive back the Swap Frog. So basically, the same combos that allowed you to make Toad before, they still allow you to make Toad. The one difference is that you have to Gigantic very late, past summon number 5, and because of that, the deck now actually loses to Nibiru if you want to go on the Toad route. And because of the fact that you have to add an extra weakness to your deck that the deck didn't have before, people might actually won't even want to go for the Toad combo anymore and might actually prefer something along the lines of Hyperia to draw cards.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. Nibiru could phase out though, because just considering like the new Tear fusion, can stop Nib. Just one more reason Nib's bad, as well as Gigantic Spright, if they don't even do the Swap Frog thing, Nib might just be bad. So I guess maybe you could get away with not playing or playing into it, but I mean, let's just go over what wins game 1 more often.
So we have to establish which builds are we really talking about, but let's just say it's just Tearlaments combo in general against pure Splite. I want to say Tearlaments combo most likely wins game 1, especially if it wins the dice roll. How do you feel about that, Tommy?
I definitely agree. I mean, it's just like Sprite's always had the problem of going second. I mean, the Runic cards for the Runic version, it could help. I really liked Kamal's version where I saw he was playing like Droplets and Storm with the Tri-Brigade Spright, and that could help going second. But I always feel like Tear just has the edge if it wins the die roll. And then Spright, it definitely has an edge still winning the die roll, but Tear has way more utility for it. Like Super Poly is still just insane because a lot of people will even end on just Carrot Red because they want the 2 negates.
Exactly. The deck can definitely lose to just like even Dark Ruler if people still play that, which I think is actually losing a lot in popularity. People just want to play handshaps now because a lot of the interruptions that we're seeing could be, handshaps or the Runic cards that obviously don't lose to Dark Ruler, or maybe people could be dwellering you on standby phase, or maybe searching trap cards in Tearlaments. And that is, I want to say, extremely huge because back then people could only really search the Solic or like whatever, the Solic or the Meta Noise with the effect of Kid Kalos, but now there is a new way to actually search more trap cards by Foolishing for Scream, and it can easily happen if you summon your Kaleido Heart and then destroy it with a field spell. So because of that, board breakers might just not really be the way to go, and I want to say Splite really relies on drawing handshaps if it wants to beat Tearlaments, whereas Tearlaments doesn't necessarily rely on drawing handshaps to beat Splite.
And then it's like if Spright decides to play like the Bestial monsters as extenders, they're just going to be weaker in the mirror because, you know, you can't do it after they're gigantic. I mean, yeah, hand traps are just getting way worse, I think. Especially with cards like, you know, even Scream not being like that bad. Like if I go Rhino plus Scream, I might get 2 fusions. And then if I'm playing the Bestial cards, like maybe I can make Mud Dragon, so like my Kakalos could not get targeted. It's just like Tier's gone way better playing around hand traps, not just with like the new fusion, like all the trap, like all the ways to get to the trap is just insane.
Yeah, like Nibiru, Gamma, and the Bisted monsters just lose out a lot to Lulu Karos, and it's actually really easy to summon in the version that is playing Branded and High Spirits, which I want to say is probably the best way to play Tearlaments, but that's another story for another day. Now, Splite has a few ways it can definitely win against Tearlaments, and the number one way, I think everybody can agree with me on that one, is by playing D-Shifter.
Yeah. Which may, like, the Bestial cards might be weaker in the mirror because you're both just, like, you're playing at a -1, theoretically. But as a side card, it's just, like, game if they draw it. Because it's just, like, the deck's just so consistent. So, where when I was playing Exorcister, I'd have problems when I opened D-Shifter. Like, I could still brick, but I just feel like Sprite, all you need is a starter or 2 sprites, and you're good.
Exactly, because of the fact that it's a much more... I want to say self-sufficient deck than Exorcister, because Exorcister kind of relies on drawing usually a combination of 2 cards if it wants to play very well, Martha and any sister, or like Pax and any sister, whatever, or even like Stella plus a sister, or Elise and something. Splite is not really like that. I mean, there's so many 1-card real combos like Starter, the 1-card Starter, and of course, you know, other ways of getting there, maybe like Hyperia and any Splite monster. Just so many ways of applying just a little bit of pressure on your own turn, and then your opponent passes, because realistically there is kind of nothing that you can do under Shifter. Some people are very well prepared, though, I will say, and they're playing Baguska, so going second or going first, they get Shifter, they just make Baguska pass, and because of that, their opponents can't really kill them, because the thing is, Shifter is a huge tempo card that pretty much gives you a turn for free, and a turn is pretty much enough to decide who wins the full game in Yu-Gi-Oh!
For side deck cards, I mean, that Tier will have going first to combat that Shifter. I mean, if people are running like combo cards like Eradicator, where you have to like actually do stuff to activate the card, I mean, it's just so strong. Unless people are citing like Solemn Judgment, then they might be able to, you know, stop you from playing. But they still have to draw like a 3 of whatever they do side. And if you do draw your Shifter, chances are they didn't draw their 3 of.
Now, would you say Tearlaments has a higher chance of winning against Splite if it wins the dice roll on game 1, maybe at like a 60% favor? 60% because it can still get kind of sacked by hand traps or something? Well, no, actually, I want to see... That would be maybe if you're going second, because I think the deck is just so heavily... just well-versed to beat Splite that you still win the majority of the time, even on game 1 going second. But going first, it would be a little higher than 60%. But again, you can still get a hand trap to death, and that's the reason why I still want to give a little bit of credit to Splite. It's not a bad deck at all, and again, if you're well-equipped to beat Tearlaments as a Splite player, you might be winning maybe half of your games, you know, losing the dice roll against Tearlaments, if not even more than half of your games. And I really want to assume that we're talking good player against good player and good build against good build.
I mean, what I initially thought for like YCS Minneapolis was that like, although a lot of people thought Spright was going to die and like people weren't going to play it, I thought like Spright would probably be the most played deck because it's just like so easy to build. But then also if they play like the hand traps, my answer was for the tier, like go harder on the Spright engine in a tier build. And then like the Spright cards just play through hand traps so well. Because, I mean, if I just have starter or blue and I make elf, it's just like a whole nother combo that, you know, if you already imper my Kakalos, it's like just so hard to beat with just hand traps. And that's where even board breakers aren't enough because you just get so much edge. If you're getting the trap and the smashers, it's like your only real answer, I feel like, is Evenly. I feel like Evenly is such a powerful card right now.
Evenly can definitely catch a lot of Splite players off guard, that I will say, because... if, you know, they're not making Carrot turn 1, or if they're not searching the starter instead of the smashers, and if they're not going for the Toad combo, which we already kind of established, makes you more vulnerable to Nibiru, they might just lose out everything to Evenly, especially if it's the Runic build, I want to say.
Yeah, I mean, if you're playing the Runic build and, like, your opponent plays Eradicator, your chances of winning are just, like, so low.
And that's the reason why I want to say Game 2 and Game 3, Tearlaments has a very, very, very high chance of winning against Runic Splite, especially if it goes first, actually. Because all you really need, when you think about it, is just, like, summon a Bisted Monster or, like, summon Kid Kalos and to, like, boosted attack. You can get a Handshap 20 billion times. You can even get Shifted. If you have your Eradicator in any monster, really, you kind of just have it.
Does Spright need to be built specifically to beat Tearlaments?
I will have to 100% agree with you on that. If you are building Splite to beat rogue decks or just decks in general, and you're not really respecting Tearlaments, you will lose the majority of the time against Tearlaments because Tearlaments, inherently speaking, is better at beating a Splite than Splite inherently is at beating Tearlaments. And the reason for that is because the monsters in Tearlaments are just big beat sticks. You can threaten a lot of interruptions just by going into battle phase. And even if you go, battle phase with no cards on field, and your opponent goes like Splite Elf target like a blue or jet to try to get a bit of resources, you can capitalize off of your Bisted monsters that way. So not only do you banish one of their cards, but also you can jump over something. So you always... feels like when I'm playing against Splite as a Tearlaments player, I trade 1 for 2 very, very often.
I mean, also, like, what she said about it being favored, like, Spright historically has been favored versus, all the other decks, where Tear was, like, powerful versus Spright and, like, meta, but not, like, Flunder or Exorcister. But Spright usually, like, just outright wins versus deck, so it's like, why not just, like, tech a little for the rough matchup? But then it's like you also got to tech for the mirror, and that's where it's like hard with a corner for that deck.
You brought an extremely valid point, actually. So Splite is considered to be kind of the check for all those other decks that would be cancerous if Splite didn't exist. Honestly, if Splite wasn't a thing, everybody would be running around playing Flunderies and Exorcister because... if you draw a Shifter against Tearlaments, the game is just kind of over. There really is nothing that Tearlaments can do. So the fact that Splite is kind of there to punish all those decks is definitely something that is, I want to see in Tearlaments' favor by a long shot.
Kind of reminds me of like Dragon Ruler, Spellbook, Evil Swarm. Like you have the Evil Swarm decks like Flunder, Exo, and then you have, Spright, which is Spellbook, but definitely not as powerful. I think, Spellbooks were the best deck back in that format, but I feel like it's the exact same thing, and like formats just repeat themselves over time, all the time.
Yeah, a bunch of pretty nice analogies. I've actually heard that from an OCG player, pro player, told me that Ishizu Tier was the closest thing there was to like full power Dragon Ruler, and then the second best deck, which was, Splite featuring Union Carrier and Dragon Buster Destruction Sword, was basically the Spellbook deck because, it stopped you from special summoning, so it was like an anti-meta deck that also won against the other decks, but it wasn't like as unfair and as powerful ceiling-wise as Dragon Ruler. Now, what would you say would be the best blowouts that Tearlaments can utilize to beat, let's just say, every version of Splite? So we'll start with Sharkgate Splite.
There's one thing I was really considering. I was even considering just maining a Mischief of the Gnomes. Or, if you're playing the Bestial, it's just broken versus that deck.
As I said, the Tri-Brigade version of Splite actually loses to Dweller, which is a thing that the other builds of Splite don't lose to. So because of that, if you're playing Tri-Brigade Splite, then you can expect to lose even more Game 1s going second against Tearlaments, which is pretty funny because if you're, let's say, a Runic Splite player and you're going up against Dweller, you're in a pretty good mood because that card literally achieves less than nothing against you. So I want to say there's always like pros and cons to every build. Like the Runic version is probably the trickiest to play because without a battle phase, you have to make like the perfect judgment calls. Sometimes you have Runic cards and you might not even want to use them because if you pass on a battle phase, you might just lose to like simplified game state stuff. Like you can't even beat over like basic stuff. So you let your opponent keep like way too many resources. And because of that, well, you kind of just lose to like a follow-up basically.
Yeah, and I mean, I watched your video for the Pendulum, like, combo, and, that deck makes Dweller too, and If we think people aren't going to play Nib, people might play Pendulum to take advantage of that because that deck's kind of weak to Nib.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, everything in Yu-Gi-Oh! In general is just a question of trends and meta calls. You can't really predict necessarily what people are going to play, so you have to make kind of like a gamble, and if your gamble is correct, then you might end up with like the best strategy in the room, even though the deck was kind of like deemed as very, very bad. And a very good example of that actually would be Exorcister. So in Niagara, everybody was playing, you know, Tearlaments, so a bunch of players like Raymond Dye and Ryan Yu chose, you know, let's go with Exorcister. If we play against like really good players in the later rounds, we're going to win all those rounds. All we have to do now is ensure that we at least have a deck that can function against Splite, which would be the very, very bad matchup that they have to deal with. And I want to say your argument with Pendulums is pretty much the same thing, really.
Tri-Brigade Spright might be weaker. Post Darkwing Blast for sure.
Yeah, I want to say, as much as I like Tri-Brigade Splite because the boards are just really, really beautiful to look at, they're huge, and you can also search a trap card, so you kind of have like answers to like Dark Ruler and stuff like that. You can search like a hand trap, like a DD Crew on your opponent's turn. You can banish a bunch of cards. It's worse against Mystic Mine because you're not really making like spell and traps and negates typically in Tri-Brigade, and also it's just, like I said, a deck that it's basically like pure Tri-Brigade featuring Splite cards, if you know what I'm saying. It's not really Splite cards, or rather a Splite deck featuring Tri-Brigade cards. You have to commit way too much to the Tri-Brigade engine, and it just makes you play less utility cards, less hand traps. So it looks like a win more to me.
And if you play Runic, you're gambling. So I don't know. Hand traps definitely seem like the wave. For, I don't know, like a final percentage, like blind, don't know who's going first, I would still say like Tier is probably 60-40 versus any Spright deck. It's just like has better chance of winning going second, and can still just like outright 90% win going first. Like depending on what Spright version you're playing. Like some it's just like way too strong versus like if you're playing an Eradicator build, the Runic is just gonna get destroyed every time. But yeah, thanks for watching the video. Yacine, anything you want to say before we go?
Yo, everyone go subscribe to Tommy, his YouTube channel. Go check him out. He's the best. And yeah, I also have a YouTube channel, by the way. It's yacine656. Go check it out as well if you're down. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching.
Yeah, no one gets combos faster than Yacine, let me tell you. Like, you're the nuts.
My man.